I'm Doug Sesserman. It's hashtag Webinar Wednesday. We're live on Facebook, and we're just excited to have you join us today. I want to begin by thanking behind the scenes our team at AABGU, Melody Mokhtarian, our Director of Events and Experiences, and Kara Bortman, our digital marketing maven. We are live in Facebook and streaming. It is noon Eastern. The software isn't totally functioning perfectly today, so I've lost my virtual backgrounds, but I'm in my apartment in New York City, and I'm joined by Professor Julie Cwikel from Israel. It's 7 p.m. there. Welcome, Julie.
It's nice to be here with you, Doug.
We're going to have a great conversation today. Julie is a brilliant faculty member and scientist at Ben-Gurion University, does incredible work. We are going to be celebrating International Women's Day a few days early. Next week on the 8th, she's actually booked with the Canadians, so the Americans preempted the Canadians. We're bringing her to you on March the 3rd. I did want to take this moment to just promote our important event coming up. We're calling Celebrating the Remarkable on April the 25th. Dr. Ruth K. Westheimer will be receiving her first and only honorary doctorate from an Israeli university, and Professor Daniel Shamovitz, the president of the university, and Chaim Hames, the rector, will be conferring that degree to Dr. Ruth, and she is excited. This event is going to be fun. You're going to laugh and maybe even cry a little bit during the program. We'll also be recognizing Tony Young, who's an amazing volunteer leader and our former president of AABGU, and Philip Gompertz, who recently retired and is known as being the steward of the largest gift ever to any institution in Israel, the remarkable $400 million Marcus Endowment gift. So congratulations to Philip. And Philip and Julie, incidentally, have worked very closely during the years. So let's get to it. Julie, I want to give a quick introduction because you're so amazing. We're so fortunate to have you today. Professor Julie Cwikel is the Chilowich Family Chair in Studies in Social Integration. She is the founder and director of Israel's only Center for Research on Women's Health, BGU's Center for Women's Health Study and Promotion. She is a social epidemiologist. We're going to learn about that. She's the author of 130 scientific papers on the subject, as well as a textbook entitled Social Epidemiology, Strategies for Public Health Activism. She's showing us her book. Professor Cwikel is also a clinical social worker. This is very important. She's a psychotherapist and the founder of Mom to Mom Negev, which is a support program for new mothers transitioning into parenthood, something I've been incredibly impressed with learning about. She's a longstanding member of Israel's Advisory Council on Women's Health, directly to the Minister of Health. She's also the founding member of the Cross-Disciplinary Committee on Perinatal Mood and Anxiety Disorders. She recently was invited to join the European Institute on Women's Health and the Israeli National Coalition to combat domestic violence. Julie was born in Seattle, Washington. She's American and Israeli. She grew up in Berkeley, California, and one distinguishing quality of Julie is that she has 2 undergraduate degrees. One from the University of California, now you're going to correct me, and one from Hebrew University, but she'll tell you exactly what her educational background is and isn't. She earned her master's and PhD from the University of Michigan, and she made Aliyah twice. Do I have that accurate?
Yep.
Once in 1973 and again in 1986. In addition to all her academic credentials and great work she's done, she's also, maybe most importantly, the mother of 7, 4 biological children and 3 stepdaughters, and the grandmother of 13. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is true.
Amazing. Welcome, Julie. So the way the program is going to work is Julie's now got a presentation that she's going to cover. It's really interesting. If you have questions during the program, just click on the Q&A function, write your questions down, and then I'll feed those to Julie at the end of our conversation. So Julie, take over. Welcome to #Webinar Wednesday.
It's a great pleasure to be here. I assume that what I do now is share the screen. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. There, I'll do that. Okay, it's a wonderful pleasure to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Doug. And what I was trying to say about my undergraduate degree is that I studied at 2 different universities in order to do that. The University of California at Santa Cruz and the Hebrew University. But we almost got it right. So what I want to talk about is how we use women's health to look not only at the present problems of women's health, but also at the future. And that's what we're going to jump in and start talking about. I know that when you think of women in Israel, you probably think directly about Golda Meir and maybe even Ada Donat, who is the only Israeli woman who's received a Nobel Prize. But there are many other women who are quite extraordinary. Gal Gadot has become quite famous in the United States, and there are many others. But if I think of who inspires me among the Israeli women that are famous, my thoughts go to Henrietta Zold, who I consider my role model. She was born in Baltimore in 1860, the oldest of 8 daughters, the daughter of a rabbi. And she used her position to innovate in many ways having to do with women's lives. She was a founder, of course, of Hadassah. She also founded Hadassah Hospital here in Jerusalem. She was a woman who started training programs for social work and nursing. She's known for her establishment of Youth Aliyah, which rescued orphans from the Holocaust and brought them to Israel to become upstanding citizens here. And altogether, she promoted health education and women's rights and did it with a lot of flair. Well, one thing many people don't know, and I only learned recently myself, is that Mother's Day in Israel is on her yahrzeit. Excuse me, I'm running ahead. Falls on her yahrzeit because she's considered the mother of all children, even though she herself never did have children. So I'm going to make an overview, a little bit of a background on women's health. I'm going to talk about social epidemiology and what makes our approach to women's health in our center quite unique. I'm going to talk about a few of our accomplishments. It's pretty hard to get 22 years of research and work into a 25-minute presentation, but I'm trying to do my best. I'm going to give an example of a piece of research that we did in the field that developed into a really important green innovation in biogas. I'm going to describe very briefly what we do in Mom to Mom and in our psychotherapy center called Isha B'Shela. I'm going to quickly give you an overview of some of our accomplishments in numbers, and then I'm going to talk about our most recent research group called Covana. So when we talk about women's health, what are we really talking about? We're talking about the preservation of wellness and the prevention of diseases that are unique to women, more common among women, more serious among women, or have unique manifestations, risk factors, or that require interventions that are special for women. We, of course, look at the interaction between biology and gender. Of course, biology is what we were born with. Those are our genes. Men are different from women, as you know. And we look to see how our biology interacts with gender. Gender, of course, is the psychosocial representation of how we feel about being the biology that we are born with and how that interacts in the environment. So for example, there's been a whole program about the girl effect, how girls across the world can make a difference. And I suggest that you look at some of those movies. They're very, very interesting. Another area where we see biology and gender interact is in life expectancy. One of the things that's really an enigma, in fact, in women's health in Israel is that when we look at democratic nations that are well-developed, we see that in general, women exceed men in their life expectancy, usually on the order of between 5 to 7 years. And for some reason, while we have a long life expectancy for men in Israel, we would have thought that women's life expectancy in Israel would be maybe 6 years or 7 years longer than men, but it's only 3 years longer. as you can see from this chart. And in that sense, it's different from the United States and from Japan, two other countries that I gave as examples. And so it's led us to ask the question, what is it that's so good for Israeli men's health that's not so good for Israeli women's health? And some women would like to say that maybe it's because they're married to Jewish mothers, but who knows? There may be other reasons too, like health behaviors such as alcohol consumption. We also, when we talk about gender and women's health, we talk about gender inequality, which is quite universal. Women have less access to resources than men. And this affects the allocation not only of education and other resources in society, but also of health and how healthcare is distributed. We also know that when we invest in women's health, that tends to bring on an improvement in the health of families and children, because women will be the chief caregivers in the family. Now we have two interesting things that we find. We find that women, even if they're working the same jobs as men, have an extra shift, which can be as long as 21 hours a week. And women, when they're working in the workforce, for example, in Israel, they earn only 66% of what men work, even if they're working in exactly the same positions and the same jobs in the same industries. Women in the United States, tend to earn about 85% of what the men earn. But even when they are at work, women are often expected to do the cleanup jobs at work and to take on extra administrative jobs and like organizing the parties or worrying about somebody who's sick in the department. And as you can see in this cartoon, she's got to pick up also the spill of his coffee. We have some wonderful, unique gender facts about the BGU that I want to share with you. First of all, I'm happy to say that my colleague, Professor Rivka Karmi, was Israel's first female university president. And she was very instrumental in helping us start our center and keeping it going. But now that we have Professor Daniel Chemovitz, who's the current BGU president, he also is supporting a policy of including women at a 50-50% representation on the important committees in the administration here. So that's very important too. When we look at how many students we have 1,200 Arab students in BGU, of whom 450 are Bedouin from the South, and 70% of those are women. And we're very proud of the fact that a BGU graduate with her doctorate, Dr. Samira Al-Fayumi Zaidna, is now joined our center and is one of the staff members working on the area of prevention of postpartum depression among Bedouin women and has joined our program on Mom to Mom. When we look at what makes our approach unique in our center, we look to social epidemiology. When I was a doctoral student at the University of Michigan, I was there at the heyday of the AIDS epidemic, and everybody was talking about social epidemiologists going to do this and do that. And I said, okay, so I must be a social epidemiologist because I've already got 2 degrees in social work. So that's what I'm going to be when I grow up. And where's the book already? And they said, well, nobody's written a book. No, there is no book. And so I said, well, maybe I'll write it. And it took me 12 years, but I did write the first comprehensive textbook, the only textbook to this day that's written by a single author. And it's given me a blueprint for how to make progress in public health. One of the things we look for is where do we find natural human laboratories? And in the Negev, we have a wonderful mosaic of women coming from all different parts of the world. As you can see, there are many United States, Europe, North Africa. We have Bedouin Arab women. We have women coming from the former Soviet Union. And of course, we have Israeli-born women. And one of the other things that's unique about our center is that we actually sit in 2 faculties. We sit in the faculty of the medical sciences and the faculty of humanities and social sciences. So all of the work that we do in the center is in fact multidisciplinary and involves different disciplines. When we talk about women's health, we like to talk about women-centered healthcare. And it used to be in the olden days when people went to medical school, they learned about the bikini areas of the body, and that was women's health. But now we think about a new model, a personalized medicine model, where we look at somebody in the eyes at the eye level. We ask them what their opinion is, and we ask for their input to medical decision making. And we call that the new model of personalized medicine. Now I want to share with you some of our accomplishments, and believe me, it was really hard to choose what to talk about with 22 years behind me. But of course, we've introduced new courses into the curriculum. We have introduced new treatment methods. We have established something called CB-ART, which is cognitive behavioral therapy together with art therapy. We've done research on a lot of different issues in women's health, but I will just name a few. Women trafficked for sex work, women, the reproductive health effects of the Chernobyl accident, and helping women overcome infertility. When we talk about our community projects, we've already mentioned Mom to Mom. These are two pictures from showing volunteers together with new moms and their babies. And we also have a culturally and gender sensitive psychotherapy unit within our center called Isha B'Shela. We're very proud of the fact that we've published 2 books that also contribute to what we are able to teach our students. These are both books that were started out of conferences that we held having to do with innovations in women's health and women's mental health. And we're now in the process of printing a new book on innovations in feminist treatment methods. We also produce now both in Arabic and in Hebrew brochures for new mothers that are distributed through our Mom to Mom program. And if we want to talk about numbers, we've had over 800 women using or getting help from our Mom to Mom program, and we've trained 260 volunteers. We've had over 700 women and men receiving psychotherapy from our treatment program. We just this year, with all of our combined academics in the center, we published 50 articles in peer-reviewed journals. And over the years, we've raised a whole generation of graduate students and doctoral students, and we're very proud of all of their accomplishments. So what are the shortfalls in women's health? We've talked about a lot of good things. Well, when we look at the FDA, 8 out of the 10 drugs that were withdrawn by the FDA in the last year were done so because of adverse side effects among women. 6 out of those 8 side effects were in fact related to cardiac function. And you may ask, as I did, why is that so? And that's because we go back to the 2 major clinical trials in the 1980s that looked at how effective different treatments were for people with cardiovascular disease. And there were 35,000 men in those trials and 0 women. And up until 1993, women were in fact excluded from clinical trials, although now they are required to be taken into consideration in clinical trials. But even now, when there's a new type of drug regimen for people with cardiovascular disease called the poly pill, even now, only 25% of the people in those clinical trials are in fact women. And another thing that the NIH has come out, the National Institutes of Health, is that in fact, all of our cells are sexed. They all have a sex because they originate from either mammals or humans that have a sex as well. And so now we have a different approach that even our cells have sexes. And so this affects how people are now doing basic research. So we started our center with 2 health surveys. We did one with Jewish women and one with Bedouin women. And as you can see, there was a huge difference in urinary tract infections between the Bedouin population and the Jewish population of the Negev. So we said to ourselves, there's got to be a reason for why this is so. And we went to look at the villages that are around the Negev. By the way, 1/3 of the population of the Negev are in fact Bedouin Arab Israelis. And what we found is that in the unrecognized villages where they're transitioning into modern consumerism, there was a huge amount of waste, but not all of them had waste disposal systems in their villages. So what did they do? They used backyard burning. So one of our doctoral students did an amazing piece of work and actually went to the villages and measured how far the backyard burning was from the back of the house, and found that in some cases it's even as close as 5 meters, which is about 15 yards. And also we found that children were getting burned, and there was a lot of smoke inhalation. And waste burning is hazardous because it has non-combustible materials, it has explosive materials and produces harmful chemicals. And also we found that the urinary tract infections were associated with women having to go to outhouses in the backyard. So we started a unique program of environmental health activists, in collaboration with the Israel Nature Preserve Society. And we conducted this in the backyards, in the homes, with very low tech work with the children to create a whole cadre of Bedouin women health activists. Another innovation that we brought in was the use of biogas digesters. Biogas is what is the product of anaerobic breakdown of organic materials, and it also can use household waste and manure and also human waste. And we started a whole system of biogas digesters. Now, when I'm presenting this to you in 2 minutes, I want you to keep in mind that this was about 10 years of work in going into this program. And you can see here, people are using the methane gas as cooking gas. It's perfectly clean once it gets into that position. This is a collaboration that we had with the RFI Institute, and it was funded by USAID, in fact. And the women health activists actually went to see what a home biogas unit looks like and how they could bring it into their own villages to provide a solution. So what in the end happened? The group that were working with us started a company. The company now exports home biogas units all over the world. It's now a green solution. They also have biogas toilets that give a solution for the women that don't have to go now to the outhouses. And you can look at some of these things. And the 2 people that I worked with are still involved in the biogas movement, which is now considered a very, very green movement throughout the world. And here you can see a picture of a biogas toilet together with a modern biogas digester. Now that I used up a lot of my slides to talk about that, but I'm now going to talk about one thing in one slide. This is a piece of research that we did on breast cancer and chemo brain, because women who were being treated for breast cancer were complaining that the chemotherapy was in fact producing what we call cognitive dysfunction or a cognitive loss. And they were complaining about that. So we went to do some research, and we found, in fact, there really is no such thing as chemo brain. The cognitive loss is in fact associated with the disease itself and is not a function of chemotherapy. Why do we know this? Because women who are not getting chemotherapy but getting other kinds of treatment also report chemo brain. So what did we do? We now are trying to use these results to develop a program of cognitive behavioral therapy to help women who are young breast cancer patients return to work and deal with their compromised executive functioning. There are many other research topics. I think I'm beginning to run out of time, so I'm just going to show them to you. I'm not going to speak about them. We did many things with different groups. One of the ones that I'm most fond of is the mother-daughter health behaviors, which had a special focus on the prevention of eating disorders. But now I want to talk about the jewel in the crown, if you will. Our present research group is working on something that we call COVANA. It's the combined voice and narrative analysis using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and naturalistic language programming. So we take how we talk together with what we say, and we end up with a way to do a non-obtrusive kind of diagnosis that looks at both mental and physical health symptoms. So we have used this paradigm, which is a new paradigm, to look at how people are managing with COVID. And we're also applying now for funding for looking at long COVID, which is the long-term symptoms that people that have had COVID-19 and don't feel that they've recovered their health, between 10, 30, 80, it depends on the different research articles that you look at, end up with having long-term symptoms. So we're using the same paradigm for looking at long COVID, for people with chronic pain, people who are having mental distress, either related to COVID-19 or not, and also the burnout of first responders in the healthcare system. I'm very proud of our research team. Dr. Dan Vilenchik is from the Department of Computer Sciences in the engineering faculty. This is my postdoctoral student, Dr. Alison Peretz, who's a linguist and a psychologist. This is our wonderful field the coordinator, Ms. Rachel Abramovich, and our computer management genius, Mr. Ruslan Seryenko. And as you can see, we're men and women working together, all giving it our best and doing it in a way that's respectful and cutting edge, and the collaboration is just fantastic. So I want to thank you for listening to me today and for being with me to celebrate the International Women's Day. So let's celebrate together that the advances that we've made in women's health that benefit women, families, and society at large. And I'm sure that you know, together with many people who are listening to us, that there are new challenges lying ahead. For example, how are we going to manage with COVID-19 and the many problems it is bringing us? How are we going to manage with climate change? And in my opinion, the model that we've developed in the years of our research in this center shows the way how we might address these challenges now and in the future. I want to thank you for being with us tonight, or today. It's your lunchtime, actually. So I want to thank those in my center. I want to thank the AABGU staff who've made this possible. And thank you for joining us. Here is my email if you want to correspond with me directly. And now I turn it over to Doug, who's been hoarding all those questions as I gave my speech. Thank you, and may we all celebrate the women in our lives and the women that we admire. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Julie, and Dianu to celebrating the women in our lives. I also want to congratulate you. If you could hit the stop share on your.
I can.
Great. I also want to congratulate you that we had 75 participants. We didn't have one drop during your presentation. So people were obviously really interested. We're starting to run out of time, but I did want to get to a couple of questions. We got one from Steven Sirkin, who asked about the statistics you were citing on lifespan differences. Could you just comment if you've seen any between Haredi and secular communities?
Well, as you know, there are Haredi communities in the United States and there are Haredi communities in Israel. We do know that there's a correlation between a high number of children born and that you're raising and a shorter, long life expectancy. So while it's not specifically the Haredi way of life, it is high fertility. High fertility does bring down women's life expectancy. It doesn't really matter where, but we also know that when you have a higher number of children, you're also more likely to have a lower socioeconomic status. So those things are hard to unravel. But we do know that just of and to itself, a high fertility and having born 4 and more children does lower life expectancy.
Thank you. I didn't know that before. We got a question from Rachel Martin. She's asking if you could just give a couple of headline thoughts about the work you've done on domestic violence with women. Sure.
We did a really early piece of research on the difference between domestic violence in that same survey, those 2 surveys that I commented on, they're published. And we found that the prevalence of domestic violence was much higher in the Bedouin community. I have, for many years, been looking for partners to work with me on addressing domestic violence in the Bedouin community. I have talked about it with many men in the Bedouin community. I don't think it's something that women can start. It has to be spearheaded by men. I don't believe that women can make that social change. I am now sitting on a national council for the prevention and treatment of domestic violence. And we're gathering material about programs around the world that have been effective in treating or preventing or lessening the rates of domestic violence. It is a worrisome problem in Israel, and I know throughout the world, because COVID-19 has brought people into their homes and not let them go out. And if you have an already conflicted relationship with your partner, the very fact that you spend 24/7 with them doesn't usually improve things. So we do know that in Israel, there's been an increase in domestic violence, and that's an unfortunate thing. There's been calls to the government to provide different kinds of community resources that will allow women who are known to have be living with violent partners, and the possibility of having an alternative place to live. I'm particularly interested in looking at solutions that might be available to us using new information technologies and artificial intelligence. And we're exploring that, and I'm exploring that with a colleague. So as you probably know, domestic violence has been around, and it's written about even in the Bible. It's not something new.
Yeah,
but
I know in New York, there's been a lot of reports of an increase in domestic violence during the pandemic as people have been forced to living in their apartments.
That's right. That's the same problem that we're facing.
Yeah.
And you know what? It will not be solved until we start talking about the root sources of domestic violence. And in my opinion, that starts way back in childhood, and teaching people how to manage their anger, express their emotions without having to resort to violence in order to express themselves. And that's something that we start when children are very young, 2, 3, 4, and should be taught in schools and should be taught as a skill set as children are growing up, and particularly as they hit their teenage years. So my opinion is the best way to deal with problems is to prevent them.
Very insightful. So Julie, our last question is from Hadassah Wiener. She's asking if you found osteoporosis to be more prevalent in women than in men, and what in general do you recommend for good bone health?
Well, throughout the world, osteoporosis is more common among women, although we do find pockets of men who have high rates of osteoporosis. And I'll give you one example. We find them among Haredi men who do not do sports and spend most of their lives inside and studying. So of course, bone health is related to your childhood and adolescent nutrition. That is when we put down most of our bone structure. So good nutrition with lots of calcium and lots of exercise is the way to prevent osteoporosis as you get older. And if you have already, or you're born with, or you developed a delicate bone structure, then the best thing to do is to be outdoors where you're going to get exposed to vitamins D, and also to do exercise every day. And that will keep your bones healthy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you thank you to the audience for joining us. We had a great attendance today for International Women's Day, which is next week, but we're doing it today in the States. So thank you very much. It's actually International Women's Health Month, I believe. So we have great events coming up. I mentioned this Celebrating the Remarkable on April 25th. March 9th, we have a terrific Ben-Gurion Circle webinar series from the university featuring previous winners of the honorary doctorate. This is with Dr. Harvey Feinberg on March the 9th. And on March the 17th, join us for what to expect from Israel's latest election, which will be the fourth election in 2 years' time. So once again, thank you to Professor Julie C. Wickle for joining us today.
Cwikel.
David Ben-Gurion, the founder and first prime minister, who I call the #2 Jew all time, and the guy whose name is on the door of our university, once said that the state of Israel will be judged not by its wealth, nor its military strength, nor its technology, but by its moral worth and human values. And I think, Julie, your work is a great example of how we take technology and science to improve mankind, people kind, womankind. And you truly are, and your work is a moral inspiration to all of us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.